what you're gonna do.
You can't fight the future.
Wrestling God.
ProWrestlingRadio.com presents.
Are you talking to me?
Pro Wrestling Radio live online.
You think The Rock actually cares?
What is he doing here?
Oh, it's true.
I'm bringing everybody with me.
That's hard time.
To be the man.
6, 1. Can you feel it?
I hate your ever. Hold the damn phone.
That's how I roll.
You're sex at the bitch. Come get some.
Because I've done all of that.
And now your host of the show,
The king is back on his throne.
Eric
Excuse me.
Gargiulo.
And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so.
Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Radio Podcast. My name is Eric Gargiulo, and I am excited because on this podcast, we are talking about my favorite promotion of all time, Memphis Wrestling. And I can't think of a better person to join me on the podcast tonight to talk about Memphis Wrestling than Memphis Wrestling historian and author Mark James. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And I just want to introduce you and maybe set the table, talk a little bit about your background. I'll tell you a little bit about mine when it comes to Memphis Wrestling. I started watching pro wrestling in 1982. I live in the Northeast, and I was immediately attracted to all of the Memphis stories that I would see through the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines and Inside Wrestling magazines, just the characters and the storylines, and it just seemed like the guys, especially Jerry Lawler, were just bigger than life. And as I got a little older in the later 80s, I got involved in tape trading, and I was able to acquire a nice collection of Memphis, and I was just hooked. I just loved the angles. I loved the promos. I loved the stories, all the different talent that came in and out. It was just something else, and it really spoke to me as a teenager that was starting to outgrow the Hulk Hogan Northeast WWF wrestling at the time. So that's where I come from as far as Memphis Wrestling, and even today I could still sit around and watch those old tapes and find them just as fun and entertaining as they were 20-something years ago. So how about you? How did you get involved? How did you discover Memphis Wrestling as a fan? And then I guess if you could kind of take me through how it evolved into you starting to write books and get involved in the business aspect.
Okay. I was born in 1967 as a kid. Around 1972 or 73, my grandparents watched it. I was over there at their house one Saturday and watched it, saw the show, and immediately just got hooked as a little tiny kid. And through the 70s, watched Memphis Wrestling, through the 80s as well. He came on every Saturday in our house, and me and my little brother just always watched it.
Yeah.
That's really just how simple as it is. Just as a little kid, it was all we knew. I can remember probably around 1977 or 78 seeing the wrestling book at one of a drugstore or something, or a grocery store, and I was stunned that there's wrestling going on all over the world. I just thought it was our little our little neck of the woods. That was the only place it was happening. And it was just the Bill Apter magazines, and that's when I realized how big it really was.
Yeah.
From there, it was just always being a fan. If you jump forward about 30 years into I guess about 10 years ago, a lot of people had been doing tribute sites to all the old promotions. Florida had one, Texas had one, Mid-Atlantic had a big one, Georgia as well, WWF. And Memphis didn't really have a tribute site, so that's kind of how I decided I could either, accept that there wasn't one and it might just go away, or bite the bullet, so to speak, and do one myself. And that's kind of how it started, doing the MemphisWrestlingHistory.com.
Sure. Were you surprised once you got the website going about how many of the older Memphis stars and the different talent that came through Memphis contacted you and reached out to you to acknowledge the website?
That was initially it wasn't much because it was different 10 years ago. A lot of the older guys still weren't talking. Some of the younger guys, like when I say younger guys that came around in the 90s or whatever, a lot of them had already done like the shoot interviews and all that. But the older guys like Lawler and Jarrett knows, Bill Dundee is another one. not really embraced talking about the old days yet. They still believed in kayfabe and keeping quiet or whatever. Lawler was very positive about it. I got to know Jerry Jarrett a little bit, and he was very positive about what was going on with it. So from there, it just kind of steamrolled, and heard from a lot of the guys from the old days.
That's great. That's great. And we'll talk more about your site before the end of the podcast, but I just want to give it out there to those listening out there. It's MemphisWrestlingHistory.com. It's an awesome site, and you have all your books up there, and it's just, if you're somebody like me that just loved following Memphis wrestling and just can't get enough of it, want to learn more, I think it's a really cool site. You just have all kinds of really, really neat information up there.
Yeah, and that's it's a bit. And everything on the website is free. You don't have to pay to see anything that's on there. I do the books. I do this and that. I do T-shirts. If you want a T-shirt, you can get a T-shirt. I just last week or week before I released a Moondogs T-shirt as an example. I talked to Randy Cully, who was the original Moondog Rex. I talked to him and his wife, and he said, "Oh, I'd love for you to do one." So I put one out there, created it, and did it. Gilbert a couple weeks ago about Eddie Gilbert. Actually, today I just released a Eddie Gilbert T-shirt with the family's blessing on that. So we've got, I don't know, a couple dozen T-shirts out there and some books if you want to buy something. If you don't, just look at the site and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So you talked about growing up and watching Memphis wrestling. I can't even begin to imagine what it was like as a kid during that time period, the 70s, and then as you got older, the early 80s, just living in that area and watching it. I went down for a fan trip. I think it was like 1988 or so. Mark Calloway was down there. The Undertaker was down there. He was doing like a tar and feather match, and Dutch Mantell was managing him at the time.
Yeah, there was an agreement with Texas at the time. Jerry Jarrett had a partnership with World Class, and they were bringing a lot of guys in from Texas, and Mark Calloway was one of the guys. They brought in, Steve Austin wrestled here before he was Steve Austin. Actually, Dutch is kind of responsible for calling him Steve Austin.
Yeah.
Because his real name's Steve Williams, and there's, Dr. Death, of course, Steve Williams, so they made him change his name. They brought a lot of guys in from Texas going back and forth, and that's around the same time Lawler won the world title and had the big feud with Kerry Von Erich as well.
Yeah, so as a kid, when you were in school, I mean, when I was in school, I'm 10 years younger than you, so wrestling was a little taboo on the Northeast, where once you got into middle school and high school, it was kind of rare to see a Hulkamania shirt or a Jimmy Snuka shirt in this area. But for as crazy as the fan base was in Memphis, when you were in school, what was it like? Did the other kids readily acknowledge that they were watching wrestling? Did other kids come to school with programs and things like that?
Yeah, a lot of them came with programs. There was in the 70s, there was not anywhere near as much marketing and merchandising going on like it is today. And actually, it's the latest book I'm working on with Jim Cornette that comes out next week is about the merchandising of Memphis wrestling. Jerry Lawler had a T-shirt. Bill Dundee had one or two. They all had pictures, but that was, really limited what was out and available for the fans. But definitely the programs, the kids in school would talk about it, a lot of that, because it didn't have a major sports team other than like the University of Memphis, which was Memphis State at the time, like a college basketball team. Everything else was minor league stuff, no NFL team, no NBA team at the time. So there wasn't a lot of sports for the males to congregate around, so to speak. And that's what Memphis wrestling became. It became the male, sports team more or less for the city. And not everybody loved it, but a lot of people really did, young and old.
Yeah. It's funny because today, the kids today and the fan base today, they see Jerry Lawler on Raw, and he's a bit of a character of himself, but he truly was the king of Memphis, and I don't know. I don't know if you can explain to the people listening, what it was about Lawler that just connected. I mean, I always thought that his promos, he just always seemed genuine. He wasn't. What I always liked about him was he wasn't always out there yelling and screaming and ranting. He would talk to you as if you were a father sitting down and talking with your son about you got to pick up you're gonna pick up your 2x4 and you're gonna go down to the bar and you're gonna meet those bullies head on, and you might not win and you might lose, but you're gonna give them a good fight. And I just always thought that what appealed about Lawler was he just always seemed so genuine in his interviews.
Yeah, I think the big thing is a lot of people under, I don't know, let's say you're 30 years old. Well, you were born in 1983.
Well, I was born in
So
I was born.
Well, I'm just saying in general.
Oh,
if
yeah.
someone was born, it's they're around 30 years old right now.
Yeah.
They've always known wrestling was not real, so to speak. Growing up, I was born in 67. You were born in 77-ish. It was still, when we were little kids, it was still considered real. You believed it was real. That was the whole deal. And because of that, I know they talked about it in a couple reviews on Punk the other night on Monday Night Raw, how real his segment seemed, the words. That's what the wrestlers did every week, just like CM Punk did the other night.
Yeah.
When they talked, it was real. And that the fans believed it. The only thing that people would go buy tickets was them talking on TV Saturday morning. If they didn't do it the right way or the fans didn't believe it, ticket sales suffered. And, when Lawler talked, they believed it. And like I said, it's the only thing you've ever seen is Lawler on Monday night. It's a total 180-degree character, what he was on the Saturday mornings in Memphis. He was totally serious, and he was the big hero of the promotion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, growing up in the Northeast, we had a slew of wrestling managers at the time. We had the Bobby. Well, when I started watching wrestling, it was Captain Lou Albano and Blassie and the Grand Wizard. But I mean, Memphis, you guys just had the cream of the crop when it came to wrestling managers. Jimmy Hart, who I think, I don't know about you, Mark, but I think that Jimmy Hart's run in Memphis is arguably one of the greatest in wrestling history. I don't know. What do you think of Jimmy Hart's run in Memphis?
It was amazing. Lawler he had never really been on the microphone in Memphis at all. He started managing Jerry Lawler around August to September 1979. Well, in January of 1980, 4 short months later, Lawler had been a heel, and Lawler broke his leg and went out. Promoter Jerry Jarrett and his booker was Bill Dundee at the time. They all got together and said, we're going to make Hart the main bad guy and put him at the top of the promotion. And it was either sink or swim. And Jimmy had the musical booker, and so he was okay being in front of the camera and talking. And that really cemented it. And he did that famous little, when Lawler comes out, or Jimmy comes out that Saturday morning after Lawler broke his leg and says, Lance Russell, what do you do if you get a prize racehorse and he breaks his leg? You shoot him. And the fans went crazy against him. And that totally set up Jimmy Hart the next year, waiting until Lawler come back. And I've always described that feud between Lawler and Dundee as kind of like Batman against the Joker. You got the ultimate hero against the ultimate bad guy. You needed someone to be equally good as being a bad guy that Lawler could destroy, but still he had his guys attacking Lawler. And that was what made that whole dynamic work so well. And Jimmy held his own as the bad guy. He really did. In my opinion, probably the best manager Memphis ever had.
Yeah.
And just like Lawler now at the WWE, he does his little thing, and Jimmy Hart did his little thing, which was not what he did in Memphis. Totally separate character. The manager he was in Memphis was just, it was a work of art the way he did it.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but there was one promo that he did that stuck out that I thought was both awesome and hilarious. There was a promo when he was kind of a tweener manager with Austin. He was a heel, and Austin Idol, I guess, was kind of a tweener. And Lawler kept warning him warning Austin Idol about Jimmy Hart. And Jimmy Hart wasn't in his corner or something for a matchup. And Hart and Lance Russell called him out on TV, and Jimmy Hart blamed it on diarrhea. I thought it was awesome.
Jim. Oh, okay. What I was saying was Jimmy was very quick-witted, just like Jerry Lawler. You could throw anything at Lawler, and he'll have an immediate comeback. Jimmy was the same way. You couldn't catch him with, suddenly where he didn't have a response. He always had a quick-witted response. It was always excellent.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped it as well. But, yeah, Jimmy was amazing.
Yeah. When you look back at all the great managers that came through Memphis, was there a guy that you saw come through, whether it was, when you were a kid or you were older, that you were surprised didn't break out and become a bigger national pro wrestling star?
You had guys come through that, so many of them that looked good ended up becoming really good, going to bigger and better places. There were just so many. There was just a gluttony of guys coming in and out constantly. The Randy Savage, Hogan came in 79, I guess it was, before he did his first WWF run for Vince Sr. Rick Rude came through, Jim Neidhart. My gosh, there's just so many of the guys that came through that were really, really, good, and you could see that they were good. Off the top of my head, I really couldn't say that I was thinking back on it, I'm sure there were, but it would be hard to say who, because somebody did do well.
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on him a couple minutes ago, but Austin Idol is a guy that I always thought was tailor-made to have a national run with Hulk Hogan at some point, and it never happened. I know I've seen plenty of video where he had his runs in Georgia with Ric Flair, but Austin Idol's a guy that I just always thought was going to be this huge national star, for the WWF when he decided he wanted to go national. And I've talked to Austin a little bit over the years, and just a really cool guy from the few conversations I've had. What do you make of Austin Idol? Why don't you think that he broke through national or had that big run with Hogan?
I don't know if he really wanted to be honest with you. I've talked to Austin also a couple times, and excuse me, and I just don't know if he wanted to do that. He had the plane crash, and after the plane crash, he really didn't like to fly, and that's being an understatement. Excuse me, when he did all the damage to his legs and his feet from that plane crash. And really he wanted to be in a promotion where he could just drive here, there, and back and not be in the air. And if you go even back with Hogan, by then, Hogan, they were doing a national push and there was no way he could drive. I personally believe that was a lot of that. He had a decent run in Mid-Atlantic as well, and, he did some Florida stuff and the big Georgia stuff, and then Continental, Knoxville, and all the way down in Alabama, whatever, and he stayed pretty much in that area. I just think he wanted to be able to call his own shot, so to speak, and, you start doing the other stuff, you start losing control somewhat, and, I think he handled his career the way he wanted to. Obviously, the fans thought he could have been a much, much bigger deal, and I agree with you on that. I think he was an amazing talent.
Yeah.
Totally underutilized, but I really think, I think it was more on his own decision on that than other promotions saying, no, we don't want you. I think it was he's saying, I'm happy where I'm at.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The plane crash makes sense. Bruiser Brody is a guy, I remember only seeing one tape of him coming through Memphis. It was a tag match with Lawler, and I think David Schultz was involved as well in it. Yeah, Brody's a guy you would think would have been tailor-made to come in and out of Memphis as a hired gun of sorts, but he never really did. What do you make of Brody's inactivity in Memphis?
He came in a couple times. It was around the middle of, I'm off the top of my head, obviously, but I think it was the middle of 85 maybe, or 86, one of those two. I think 85. And he came through for 1 or 2 weeks, and that was it. Memphis was notorious for making videotapes of and doing music clips and of the matches, and he didn't want to, his deal was Japan, and if Memphis made a tape of him getting pinned by Lawler, that would be bad for him in Japan. This little American guy beating Big Brody, who's a monster in Japan, and it would cost him money. So I think a lot of that had to deal with which other places where he had that deal. He didn't want to get pinned clean by a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And in Memphis, you came to Memphis and you fought Lawler near the heel, you're going to clean job to Lawler.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that was purely it. And I think that's purely the only reason why.
Gotcha. Makes sense. We talked about managers, tag teams as well. I mean, Memphis is just known for just some of the greatest tag teams. The fabulous ones come right off the top of my head, and I know there were many others. Who are some of your favorite tag teams that you remember watching growing up through Memphis?
You mentioned the Fabs, and I think they have to go down as the biggest tag team in Memphis history, and a lot of people nationally don't understand that, but there was a wrestler in Memphis, Jackie Fargo, who was he was the Lawler before Lawler. He's the guy that passed the torch to Lawler in 1974, to be the big guy, and he was called the Fabulous Jackie Fargo, and he was so popular with the fans, even at that point when the Fabs were created in 82. You can look on YouTube, and you can see there's a video of him talking about bringing the Fabs in to fight Jimmy Hart's guys. New York Dolls were ripoffs of him and his brothers down in Rough House. And that got over with the fans so much, that rub from Jackie Fargo, that's what made him $1 million in Memphis. And they ended up going national a little bit, went to AWA to fight the Warriors, and went down to Florida and went down to Texas, and UWF as well, Bill Watts. They never got over as well, and it was literally because of that rub from Fargo and Memphis.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big deal. Why? I mean, you got to realize in Memphis, Rock and Roll Express were second-tier team. They were the middle of the card team because the Fabs are so popular. and that's why I could send them off to Bill Watts around, I guess it was 84, 85, whatever that was, when they sent all those guys down to Bill Watts' place.
Yeah.
With the trade and brought recruiting those guys in. It was because they couldn't use them at the top tier at the main event because the Fabs were there.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but you got the Fabs who were great. You got Rock and Roll Express who were great. One of the best tag teams I ever saw was Bobby Eaton and Coco Ware, who was wrestling the Sweet Brown Sugar. They were a heel team.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing team. One of my favorite teams ever. In the 70s, you had a team called, it was Dennis Condry, who was Midnight Express with Bobby Eaton, and a guy named Phil Hickerson. They were one of, in my opinion, probably the best team that never went national ever. They were an amazing team. Trying to think of some others off the top of my head. Lawler and Dundee were a big team locally. You just had so many teams. Nightmare and Speed, you had the Nightmares. Ken Lane and Ted Allen originally. That was Nightmare and Speed, which were Ken Lane and Danny Davis.
Right.
I'm trying to think who else. I mean, there was just tons of teams through here.
Yeah, and you just speaking of the Fabs a little bit, I think it was the Moondogs. I just remember watching their matches when I started trading around and getting tapes, and just being blown away because their matches were just pure brawls from the second they hit the ring to the end of the match. And I mean, I don't know if they're on YouTube now. If anybody's listening, if they could dig those matches up on YouTube, but I think those matches are just some of the most exciting matches you'll ever see.
Yeah, they had a really, really good feuds with guys. And the first one that caught my eye was when they fought the Sheep Herders.
Yes.
And that was just as violent and just as bloody and just as bad as the feud after that was against the Moondogs, and it was just a pure war. When you watch those matches, and they're on YouTube, both sets of matches, because they went wrestled for a couple months, you see those matches, and they're busting boards, fence boards over each other's heads in those matches. You're not saying, "Oh man, that's fake." That's fake. It's like, wow, how did that? He just busted him over the head with a board.
Yeah.
And but yeah, they very real, very violent, and that's why they got over in Memphis, because that's how Fargo used to be, really rough and violent, and they picked it up and ran with it. And here's an example of how powerful and how popular they were. Memphis traditionally used to run one night, one town, literally every night of the year. When the Fabs came along, they finally had, because Lawler had to be on your main event, they could split towns and do 2 towns a night, and do one main event would be the Fabs, and the other town, 600 miles or 300 miles away would have Lawler in the main event.
Wow.
And they could run 2 nights. It's the first time they've been able to do that ever. And I think I did a 1982 book, and I believe they had done, after the Fabs came on board, they had done 377 shows in 365 days or something. So.
Oh my gosh! I wanted to talk to you about 1982, and it's funny because just again through tape trading, I was just always fascinated with everything that happened in Memphis in 1982, and it was pretty cool to go to your website, when it launched, and then follow your book and see that I wasn't the only one. That 1982 really is a golden year of Memphis.
Oh yeah.
I mean, can you talk a little bit about it and just its place in wrestling history?
Yeah, I can give you a quick synopsis of the year because it just jumps from one headline to the next. The first, Memphis did a babyface feud with Jerry Lawler and Dutch Mantel, and Dutch is now, what's his face in the WWE?
Uncle Zeb, yeah.
Yeah, Zebediah, whatever.
Right.
Whatever. Anyway, he's over the Americans or whatever they're called.
Yes.
Anyway, he was a huge babyface back in the day, and he did the Lone Wolf. He's kind of the guy that showed Steve Austin, Stone Cold, how to have that Lone Wolf attitude. He was the original Lone Wolf guy. And although he was a babyface, you kind of wonder if he was going to be a bad guy. But he stayed babyface, fought with Lawler. They fought for 3 months. Had an amazing feud. He got clean pins over Lawler, and that was really, really rare. No one really got clean pins on Lawler. There's always some type of screw job finish where Lawler might lose. Dutch got clean pins, and it was an amazing feud. From there, you go straight into the Andy Kaufman feud that started. That was in April of 1982. Huge deal, nationwide. It got Memphis national coverage. Got Lawler and Andy on the David Letterman show in that August or September, whenever that was, later that summer. From there, you go into the summertime. It was always the big time. Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett created Kamala out of a wrestler who wasn't very good, so they made him the Ugandan giant Kamala. and Kamala did huge business that summer. I mean, they were literally getting sellouts, 11,200 to 500 every week for like the first 4 weeks Kamala was in town.
Yeah.
That went throughout the summer. You get into the fall, you've got, I know I'm probably missing some things. He finally falls to Lawler. Then in the early fall, you start getting the Fabs that came out around September, October. The Fabs were formed because Jimmy Hart formed a team called the New York Dolls, which was Troy Graham, the Dream Machine, with Rick McGraw, used to be a WWF guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they wore little tuxedos and stuff to the ring, and that insulted Fargo, and that was the whole story. He's going to bring 2 guys in. If you've read the book, the funny thing about the Fabs were they were originally supposed to be Stan Lane and Terry Taylor.
Oh, wow.
But Jerry Jarrett had brought Taylor in to do that with Stan, and had promised him a good run with it. And the problem was, Jarrett thought they were too good-looking, both of them. He needed someone more rugged to be with Stan, so he moved Steve Keirn in that slot and promised Terry a singles, which he ended up putting the Southern title on him for 3 or 4 months and getting him a singles run later that year. But that's, and it was very well done the way Jarrett did that. But the last quarter of the year was huge. October comes, and it was right around the time Nick Bockwinkel had just dropped the AW World title to Otto Vons for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought Nick to Memphis and had him defeat Jerry Lawler for the Southern title. They did a big angle on that, and he won the title from Lawler, and then they did 3 consecutive weeks of rematches for Lawler, and the last one was a hair match. And then I guess it was the last week of October, the last Monday night of October, and Lawler clean pinned Nick Bockwinkel in the middle of the ring for a 1-2-3 and won the Southern title back. That helped the fans see that Lawler could be a guy who was a world champion.
Right, yeah.
And then you continue to have the Fabs fighting with those guys around that time. Then the end of the year, the second to third last week of December, you had Lawler against Nick Bockwinkel in a world title match. And they did a dusty kind of screw job finish where Lawler pinned him, but Nick's foot was on the ring, or on the rope, I should say.
Yeah.
And so his hand was raised. He left the ring with AW World title. They declared, a couple weeks later, they did the deal where the title's held up and they had a rematch. And that's when Andy Kaufman and Jimmy Hart came in and screwed up Lawler's chance, and he got pinned and lost the rematch.
Wow.
So in a 3-minute deal, that's 1982 for you.
I mean, and for people that are listening to this, I mean, and haven't had a chance to watch any of that, I don't think they have any idea of just how amazing and just how much fun that year was.
Everything I just talked about, it's actually on YouTube right now. You could watch any part of that.
Oh,
the Lawler
great.
Touch feud, the Andy Kaufman stuff, the Fabs coming about, the Kamala run, Lawler against Bockwinkel for the Southern title, and then all the Fabs matches, and then also the Lawler Bockwinkel for the world title where he gets the pin with the foot on the ropes.
Oh, that's
Every
great.
bit of that's on YouTube. So.
Oh, that's great. Speaking of the tapes, that's a question that's come up over the last couple of years, is about WWE acquiring the Memphis library. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you'd be the man to ask. I've always been under the impression that nobody is quite sure who actually owns the Memphis Wrestling library. Is that true?
Yeah, it's sort of that way. The USWA stuff, which USWA was formed in, I guess, late 1988 after Lawler title, and they did the unified thing. I'm guessing, I can't remember the exact date the USWA formed. Mm-hmm. Lawler sold the USWA to Excel Sports out of Cleveland, I believe, around, 97, 98, 96, 97, 98, something like that. And all the assets were, they became the owner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the CWA stuff was from like 1978, 77 when Jerry Jarrett formed it, when he opened up the company, and went until like 1988 when the CWA ceased and it became the USWA.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know who actually owns the stuff from 77 to 88.
Mm.
I don't know if it's anybody's, because you talk to Jarrett. Jarrett says, I signed over the company to Jerry Lawler, and then Jerry Lawler turned around and sold it to this XL company. So he doesn't know. He doesn't claim it. He doesn't know. He's out of the picture.
Wow.
And, so Lawler, in theory, Lawler could claim that he has the other. I know Corey Macklin put out, did that deal with High Spots about all those, Corey Macklin presents Memphis Wrestling. Well, I know Corey Macklin doesn't own the rights to those.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
Because Lawler sued him for him, and he declared bankruptcy and then got wiped out. So.
Gotcha. Another great story from Memphis is the promotional war with Randy Savage and his family against Lawler and Jarrett and the company. And I mean, you lived there. You were there and you were a part of it. You went to shows and maybe you saw some things. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that war. Did you ever go to shows and see anything like Savage coming into the front row with a sign or anything like that?
No, it was never. They would never come this far south. They wouldn't leave Kentucky.
Okay.
It was all if they did something, it would be in the Lexington, Kentucky, or the Louisville, Kentucky shows. If they did anything, if it was at one of the bigger shows, they really wouldn't let them in. They never, like I said, they never really. The only thing we got in Memphis was we got the ICW show on one of our stations here, which was there, and just like Jerry Jarrett says, they would spend 10 to 15 minutes of their show talking about Lawler and Jarrett and Tojo and those guys and Dundee, and you show up and I'll give you $10,000 to fight me and this and that. They were literally giving the Memphis guys advertising, free advertising.
Yeah.
And Jarrett never acknowledged them once, which is good for him because you acknowledge him, you make people go look at him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, no. And I was just going to ask you if when Savage finally did come in, if you could just talk about how huge that must have been for people in the territory.
Oh, it was, because you'd always seen, Savage on that, screaming and yelling, and boom, he just walks in unannounced one day, busts through the doors and comes in, him and his dad, Angelo, Poffos. And it was a big deal because no one really knew. I'm sure the people in Kentucky might not know, but like in Memphis when he came out on the TV, no one really knew ICW had closed. And that's what happened. They closed up. They couldn't compete. And, a month after they closed, Jarrett called Savage and said, "Hey, let's do some business." And he says, "You're not upset?" He said, "No. You gone out. I think now we'll do an angle where you come in and invade, sort of like the NWO stuff. And I think we'll make a lot of money." And this was 1983, I believe. Summer or fall of '83.
Yeah.
And it did huge business. I mean, they ended up eventually turning, after a big, heel run, they ended up turning Savage into a good guy and having him team with Lawler a bunch. Savage, and as far as Jarrett's got nothing but good things to say about Randy Savage and dealing with him. He was an honorable man and did everything he did, and he didn't have a lick of problem with him at all the whole time.
Mm. A story that I've heard is that there were actually plans in the works for a Jerry Lawler Elvis Presley match and feud. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't know what it would all have entailed, but yeah, I've heard that repeatedly. Elvis did like wrestling a lot. I don't know to what extent he could have done anything.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would have liked to have done it. I know the wrestling promotion would have loved to have him there, because back then, anytime any type of celebrity wanted to be involved, they wanted him there, because they were looking for any outlet to get more people in and to legitimize it. So I know the promotion would have loved it.
Mm. One of my favorite runs in the territory was the Stud Stable. And for us here in the Northeast, we were able to get Memphis weekly at that time on the Financial News Network. So it was really cool to follow it. So I got to see all of that stuff week to week. And I think it's one of the most underrated runs in Memphis. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that, because I absolutely loved watching Robert Fuller back then in the Stud Stable.
Yeah, Robert was real good friends with Jerry Jarrett. And he was, at the time, he was doing the booking as well. And a much more successful booking run than he had in early '79. He did a horrible run as a booker here. Anyways, but he came back. He'd been around a lot of places, and they brought him back, and it rejuvenated the promotion somewhat. He had he was teaming with Jeff Jarrett and feuding with Jeff Jarrett back and forth, and just a lot of guys came in. You had Cactus Jack being one of them through that whole feud back and forth. He had been able with them in the feuding, and but no, Robert had a good run here. He real good run those years. A lot of people from him. And that's vintage early Jeff Jarrett, and that really helped put him on the map as well. Robert was a good veteran wrestler, and it really helped his career.
Something I never knew about until I watched Memphis Heat, which was phenomenal, was the Mario Galento incident. Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that. Did you watch it as a fan? Were you watching it live as it went down?
No, that was early. That was when I was just starting to watch. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I want to say it was around 73 or so, probably. The exact date's kind of lost to time, so to speak, because that's around when that happened. But yeah, Jerry Jarrett was fighting Jerry Lawler on Saturday morning TV. Mario Galento, well, it might have been a tag team. I can't remember if it was a tag team or not. No, it was a singles because Lawler had Sam Bass as his manager, and it was against Jarrett. And Jerry Jarrett's in the ring fighting, and he gets the upper hand on Lawler, and someone jumps out of the crowd, gets in the ring, and hits him with the blackjack once, something like that. And then it's like he starts seeing stars, and then he hits him, the referee then hits Galento, and then Jarrett's trying to catch his breath, so to speak, because he got whacked in the head. Mm-hmm. And then Lawler and them start jumping Galento, but Jarrett doesn't want Lawler to, because then it's like they're teaming together against this guy, and they don't want to do anything to make the fans think this guy isn't a heel. That's how, and then they beat him up pretty bad. I've got a friend of mine I know who was actually a student of Galento's at that time, because Mario had a wrestling school in Memphis, over on Broad Avenue. And he was literally going to go back there that Monday night with a gun and shoot him.
Wow.
And he was with all his wrestlers, the ones he was training to go with him, and this guy said, "No, I ain't going with you, Mario. I quit your school." And, but, a lot of what, I forget that there was some other guy in the crowd, I forget who it is. There was a wrestler that went to the show, and he sat by Mario and told him, he says, "Don't do anything because I got a gun in my pocket. You might have one in yours, but I got one in my pocket. So you're not going to do anything." Galento did go to the show, but nothing happened.
Gotcha. Another, we talked about good runs in Memphis. I thought one of the coolest runs was when Vince McMahon came down there as a heel for those couple of months, and it was way before the WWE fan base got to see the Mr. McMahon character. And I remember seeing those tapes at the time, and my buddies and I, we would get the tapes once a month, and we would count down the days because we couldn't wait to get a hold of Vince's interviews at the time because they were just awesome. What do you remember about Vince's run against Lawler in Memphis?
That all came about because it all had to do with Vince's federal drug steroids trial that he had back in the early 90s. I'm not going to give you a lot of background information. At the time, he was convinced, back in the early 90s, that the government had a trial against you, you lost, and you went to a federal prison, period. Mm-hmm. Vince was like the first guy to ever beat a federal rap, ever. He had hired Jerry Jarrett to come on board and run the WWF at the time because he was convinced he was going to jail.
Yeah.
And so Jarrett's up there, and he's kind of the guy, when things started looking better, says, "Look, why don't you come down to Memphis, play a little bit?" Jarrett was the guy that got Vince to hire Lawler up there on the color commentary. He said, "Well, you want to do this, let's use you." So it was a lot of it was Jerry Jarrett's idea to send Vince down to Memphis. Hey, go learn how to do this, do it, get used to it. You can always use it later, have some fun with it.
Wow.
So a lot of that, and the fans hated Vince. We already hated Vince, being that a lot of people like me felt Vince ruined wrestling at the time because, you use the WWF as opposed to real wrestling. And so that's how we felt about it. So we already had an already dislike of the man. He came down being cocky and arrogant about it, and it only added fuel to the fire.
Yeah. And it was really there was almost a precursor to the Bret Hart-Steve Austin feud later, because you had Bret Hart coming down to Memphis at the time, and Hart and Lawler were feuding in the WWE, and of course Lawler was a heel at the time, but then Hart would come down to Memphis as a heel, and Lawler, of course, the hometown babyface, and, I can't help but think that it somehow had to influence the angle years later where, Bret Hart would be a babyface in Canada and a heel in the United States.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that was the thing. You had your home base. And that's where I think Vince finally saw that, because he was so locked in a national frame of mind. When he came down to Memphis and saw the microcosm of what a small promotion could do, and it's like you've got a national hero in Bret Hart, because they view wrestling no different than ice hockey up there or football, and it's like a big deal. And it's like, why would you go do that? You're only going to make them mad, which is going to make them not buy tickets.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail totally on the head with that. Depending on where you're at, depends on, like I said, you take Shawn Michaels to Canada, he's usually going to be a bad guy. You bring Bret to the U.S., he can be either or.
Yeah.
But he's in Canada. He's got to be a baby.
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite segments, angles, I guess, moments in Memphis Wrestling on television was the Billy and Buddy show. And again, it's something else where I always thought it was great. My buddies and I always used to talk about it, but we never realized what kind of a cult following that segment actually had. Can you talk a little bit about the Billy and Buddy show and why it's still one of the most memorable, little angles and segments on Memphis Wrestling television?
Okay. It was Bill Dundee, Buddy Landell, and Dutch Mantell. Dundee had finally beaten Lawler in a loser-leave town match, and he was gone. They were taking over the show weekly almost, and the big thing happened when Dundee came out, was mad at announcer Lance Russell, and he slapped him. Lance got mad, threw the mic down, and said, "I'm not going to do this show anymore," and they kind of took over, and that was right at the end of the show. The next week comes back, and they open the screen credits, and there is a table that says the Bill and Buddy Show. It's Bill Dundee sitting beside Buddy Landell, and they're at the table because Lance is not going to be there. So they're running the show. In that episode, they also beat up a referee, an 18-year-old Jeff Jarrett. It gets going more, and they call back Lawler. He's back in, and Dutch comes out, and they turned on Dutch, and they destroy the table, and it starts a feud. Everybody talks about it and loves that so much. There was only about a 20-minute period of that TV show where the Bill and Buddy show actually existed, where that table existed, where they were doing that. And if you would think about it, the way everybody talks about it, it's like it lasted a couple of weeks. It was really only part of one show, but it lives in people's memories how revolutionary it was because it's never been done. People hadn't taken over the wrestling show and were running it that way. The wrestlers are the heels. It was just a totally new angle, at which Jerry Jarrett was great at creating.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was great. Speaking of Jerry Lawler, are you surprised? I mean, I know he had his world championship win over Kurt Hennig, and I remember seeing that as a kid and just thinking how great it was. But are you surprised that he never had a run earlier, like against Bockwinkel or over Briscoe or Race?
Not as much. He was 24 when he fought Briscoe. I him beating Briscoe at 24. There's no way the NWA would allow that. Later on, I guess the big thing was probably around 82 or so, 83. I forget when the exact time was. Or 80. No, actually it was 85. I'm sorry. It was 85. Jarrett had probably been able to secure a deal with NWA to get Lawler a short run with the world title. And they had actually done a deal where Lawler would retire by the end of 1985 if he didn't win the belt. And they pushed it hard. Well, he didn't do it, and that deal kind of fell through. But yeah, I just think as over as he was, he could have handled it. He proved it when he had the AWA world title. Excuse me. He fought good guys and bad guys equally well. He fought, he beat Hennig Ford, who was the heel, and he was the babyface. He beat Wahoo McDaniel. He beat Ronnie Garvin. Tatsumi Fujinami, he beat, I think, on TV or something like that. Mm-hmm. He was fighting good guys and bad guys. He could carry it all. Memphis was always looked down on a little bit more as not being a real wrestling promotion, sometimes by a lot of people, elitist. And I just think, it just didn't get its fair shake. Yeah. Personally.
Yeah. Brian Christopher is an interesting guy. When you look back at Memphis history, it looked like he was, he was being positioned to run the show when Lawler stepped aside. If Memphis was still around today, do you think Brian would be that top dog? And B, why do you think that he never? I mean, he had that run as too cool in the WWE, but I mean, it almost seemed as if he never reached his full potential there.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, he had tons of potential. He could talk great on the mic. He could piss the fans off. He can make them love him just like his dad could. Mm-hmm. But that was always a good deal. He had a lot of talent. He had a better physique than his dad did. He could bounce around like his dad did, taking bumps. He was great at that. I just don't know. I don't know why it didn't work. What happened? Why it didn't click? Unfortunately, I don't know. Yeah. I just know he had tons of talent.
Yeah. When we started talking, you talked about the dynamic of Dundee and Lawler. And when I had put out on Twitter that we were going to be talking Memphis Wrestling today, I got a bunch of emails and some tweets from people asking us just to talk about Dundee and Lawler and what made it so good. And I know you touched upon it earlier, but A, do you think that in the history of Memphis that was the greatest feud in Memphis? And B, what made it so good?
Yes, it is the greatest feud in Memphis history, I believe. At the time, if you look at it, I'm working on the book on 77 now, so it's kind of in my head. Jerry Jarrett he broke away from promoter Nick Goodless in March of 77. And he opened his own company. They went to war, territorial war, and Jarrett won Memphis. Nick Goodless was gone. And that summer of 77 is when Lawler and Dundee had their feud. And they basically fought I think 10 out of 11 weeks in a row. And the lowest attendance numbers in that 10-week period was 9,000 people. Most of them were over 11,000 sellouts.
Wow.
And, if you're doing that 10 weeks in a row, that's over 100,000 people in 2 months, 3 months. And that's what they did. And they were both really, really good at what they did. They could talk people into the seats. They were tough in the ring, like the old guys from the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Their punches looked real. Their moves looked real. They were rough. They were rugged. You believed it when one got hit that he really got hit. They were just rough, and it looked real. And you could tell they didn't like each other, and that came through. You could really tell that. And the fans bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And because, if everything's pushing you towards that and you believe it, because it's easy to believe, and it was easy to believe. And it just was lightning in the bottle whenever they got together like that. And that's why, and Lawler turned babyface, October of that year after doing a fake retirement thing. And by January, February, they were teaming together, and they were the most popular team in Memphis. In my opinion, the second most popular team behind the Fabs.
Wow.
Because they were both so hated. And that's what Jerry Jarrett's always said. He says, give me a guy the fans hate and I can work with them. Give me a guy that they like and I can't do anything with them. Because hate and love are so extreme, that's what matters to people, the extreme emotions. The line stuff, I like, okay, I don't like him. It's no big deal, but those extreme emotions is what makes people spend the money. And that's what they had with both of those. And when they put them together, like I said, if they were fighting each other or fighting together, people wanted to see it.
And I interviewed Bill quite a few years ago, and it seemed like there really was a little bit of an issue between him and Lawler.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Bill is, and he'll be the first to tell you, it's like, I don't get along with Lawler that great. I go out and I do my party, and then I go, dancing with the girls and this and that, and when I go drink a beer too, Lawler don't drink, Lawler don't smoke, Lawler don't do no drugs. It's like, straight arrow. Drinks his Coca-Cola and that's it. Me, I might go have a beer. He says we're just different type guys. And that's part of it. And it's like, when Bill's working, he's working. Bill was on the booking committee with Lawler and Jarrett back in those early days. Bill'd get in the office at 8 a.m. and they'd work all day on the matches, this and that. And when Lawler took over the booking later on, he became part owner, he would decide, a half hour before the matches what was going to happen, whereas the other way, Bill was more of a ultimate professional behind the scenes in the booking areas. And that's, I think, a lot of what Bill would get upset about. It's like, let's plan this out so everybody knows what they're doing. And Lawler would say, well, let's just throw it together right before it happens. We'll figure it out, Bill.
Wow.
So I think that plays into it as well. But Lawler did do good in what he did, and it worked well for him that way. But, Bill, just like the other way, just how he was brought up doing it in the business by Jarrett. So, and I think that played into it. And, you can only have one top alpha dog, and I think that bothered Bill as well. Lawler was the alpha dog in Memphis and would always be, period.
Yeah. Are you surprised to see Dutch Mantel in 2013 as a major character in the WWE?
No, absolutely not. The reason is Dutch can talk, just like Lawler can talk, just like Dundee can talk. You could have put Dundee in a similar role, somehow, some way with them. I think they're finding they need managers because a lot of their guys can't talk their way out of a paper bag.
Yeah.
And when you have that, and when so much of that show is talking, not wrestling, that is a problem. And you get guys like Dutch who can't wrestle anymore because he's too old, but can talk and talk and be on Twitter because people are mad at them. Like I said, it's that love and hate. You can make people hate them or love them 3 different times in a minute. And that's what they need, and they know that.
Yeah.
So I'm tickled pink he's got a shot at, he's been there at least 6 months before WrestleMania, even well before WrestleMania, so he's been there most of the year now, and I'm really tickled pink for him because he is an amazing talent, amazing brain for the business, amazing psychologist, and he's just good at it.
And I mean, just a super guy. I remember,
yes.
I want to say it was about 10 years ago now, that I wrote a column for OneWrestling.com, and of all people, Dutch Mantel emailed me. Just out of the blue, and for a guy like me that was a Memphis Wrestling fan, I was just blown away and marking out, of course. And I stayed and corresponded with him, every so often throughout the years, and just seeing him, in WWE, and finally, and get that big payday, at this stage of the game. I'm loving it. I think it's just great.
Oh, it is, and like I said, he's doing what he loves to do. He gets out there and talks in front of them people, and they go crazy nuts, and they never say, they should. You hear other people say, he should be able to say or do this. It's like that's what his job is, just to say and do that, to make people mad. So his guys get beat on by the good guy, and that's what you pay tickets to go see. So he's doing his job.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been awesome. This has been great. I mean, I'm just having a blast. But I know you have a new book out. I don't know. It'll probably be out by the time people download this. Rags, Paper, and Pins. And I want people to know about it. I want people to buy it. So if you can talk a little bit about it.
Sure. Jim Cornette and I did this book together. We got tons of old Memphis merchandise between him and me. We both, pretty much everything in the book is stuff we both owned. We didn't have to go out and get any other things. And it just covers in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and part of the 80s, the days before the big marketing machines of wrestling had started, where they were just pumping out just stuff left and right. We've got some old, we talk about the records that wrestlers did back. It mostly covers Memphis. The term Rags, Papers, and Pins was by Sputnik Monroe. That's what he would call the gimmick tables that showed the pictures of the wrestlers, of little photos, pins, and stuff like that with the wrestlers on it. And that was a term he used back in the day. And so that's the reason we called it that. And we just cover Memphis and the Tennessee territories through the Nick Gulas years, through the Jerry Jarrett years. We talk about the posters they had and the pictures and the quality of the magazines. And the book also, Jimmy Cornette put out a magazine back in 1980 through 82. It had 6 issues. It was the same format as like the Wrestling News, if you've seen those. George Napolitano and those guys did that, and he actually went to them and had them produce it. And we've actually, in the book, it reprints all 6 issues of that. It's got a ton of Jimmy Cornette pictures, because before he was wrestling manager, Jimmy Cornette pictures for the Memphis promotion. He was the guy that did all the pictures and did the programs.
Okay.
So we've got tons of Memphis merchandise, and there are tons of Memphis photos, tons of just amazing stuff people haven't seen in a long, long time. And it's just a fun look back at something not a lot of people have talked about. A lot of people own pictures of wrestlers, but they never know how that came to be. And this is just talking about that.
Well, that's great. I wish you lots of luck on it. I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait to get my hands on your 1982 book. I have a vacation coming up, and I think it's gonna be earmarked for some pool time, because I'm excited. Thank you very much for coming on. It was a real pleasure having you. It was just a lot of fun to be able to dive back into all these old memories I had, watching tapes and just reading magazines and following it as a kid.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is great. And we'll have to do it again sometime, because, I mean, there's a lot more Memphis to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you want, that's fine. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks.